pro-liberty and anti-empire. For Dr. Joseph Warren, one of the most important leaders of the Sons of Liberty from Boston, this is no mere slogan. It was a way of life, a call to action. And despite the fact that he's one of probably the greatest American war heroes ever in history, he's mostly ignored today. And although his final stand at the Battle of Bunker Hill, misnamed, cemented his place in history to at least some people, he was very heavily involved in almost every major act of resistance by the Sons of Liberty in Boston for at least a decade, from the Stamp Act to the massacre to the Tea Party and much more. His really fiery writings, this is some seriously good stuff, focused on natural rights, individual liberty, opposition to standing armies, and resistance to usurpation of power rather than standing by and hoping that they're going to stop doing what they shouldn't have been doing in the first place. And on this episode, in commemoration of Dr. Joseph Warren's birthday, I'm going to go through some of his best hits. First of all, welcome, and thank you for joining me here on the Path to Liberty. My name is Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for Monday, June 10th, 2024. Hope you've had an awesome weekend. Thank you for kicking off part of your week with me here today. Let's get right to it. I want to start out with a blog post that we've got here from Mike Meharry, as usual. Mike writes that on June 11th, so tomorrow in history, 1741 patriot, agitator, and Revolutionary War hero Dr. Joseph Warren was born in Roxbury, Mass. We could maybe call him the architect of much of the Revolution. He was, to many, the embodiment of resistance to the British. He literally lived a life of resistance to the British, and he became an instant hero after being killed in action during the Battle of Bunker Hill, where he volunteered to fight as a private in the militia, where the heaviest fighting was expected to be. And this is despite the fact that he was actually commissioned as a major general by the Provincial Congress just before that, on June 14th, 1775. So here's a guy, he was offered a leadership role. He's like, no, I need to be out on the front line with the people, because he was one of them. He was not a boss. Although he was really a boss, maybe the GOAT. But there's much more, Mike writes, to Dr. Joseph Warren's story than just one battle. Now, we can go back, and I'm going to go through again some of the great hits. We can go all the way back. He was very young when the Stamp Act was passed. Of course, just in his early 20s. But Warren started publishing some essays in the Boston Gazette. This is the mouthpiece, or the publication really, for the Sons of Liberty. He became friends with Samuel Adams, John Hancock, and others. And he came up with three big concerns, writing as BW, three big concerns that we should all think about when it comes to government power again today. One, politicians tend to lie, and they tend to rip you off. And here's how he put it. But when we know a great part of the monies raised will be perceived to enrich a set of corrupt individuals at our expense, when we have reason to believe a part will be applied to make certain officers among us independent of the people. He's basically talking about what's going on with the Stamp Act and saying, you're raising this tax. You're claiming it's to garrison these standing armies at the end of the late war, ended in 1763. But we know that it's going to be used to enrich a set of corrupt individuals. Two, he talked about precedent. When you let them get away with one step, there's always more. There's always going to be more. John Dickinson, who I've often cited in regards to the Stamp Act, said, this establishes the detestable precedent if you comply with this. And Dr. Joseph Warren, although he didn't have the same type of a pamphlet, had something very similar. He said, if you basically, and this is from a book by, I forget who wrote this, but it'll be linked to in the show notes, because you can read much of it for free and then find ways to purchase it if you want to. And the author says, if we accepted the Stamp Act, what would be the next encroachment? And Joseph Warren put it like this: you may next expect a tax on your lands, and after that one, burthen on the back of another, till you are reduced to a state of the most abject poverty. So if you allow a far-off government the ability to tax you on internal affairs, on stuff that they shouldn't be doing, that only the people of your local area should make a decision on, as Patrick Henry put it in his great Virginia Resolves against the Stamp Act, the same view up here with the Boston Sons of Liberty led by, well, he wasn't really a leader at that point, Dr. Joseph Warren. He's saying, look, as soon as you give them this authority, whether you think it's small, as soon as you go along with this, they're going to come back with more. And when government wants to tax more, it will never stop until it faces resistance. And that's the third point that he really makes in some of these essays. Number 3 is you have to always have backbone and resistance. And he wrote, stand up in defense of your invaluable rights and privileges, and with a manly fortitude, shield them from dangers. Not to feel for public calamities, to be regardless of your country's interest, to coil yourselves up within the dirty shell of your own private conveniency. Careless of the common good is denying your title to humanity and forfeiting the character of rational beings. I did an episode recently talking about FDR's so-called gold confiscation under Executive Order 6102, and I pointed out that it really wasn't much of a confiscation because a vast majority, like 75 or 80% of the gold, was not turned in, and they weren't able to do many prosecutions under this. But many of the people who did that resistance did it very quietly and kept their convenience. They just held on to it rather than continuing to use it as commerce. And then they enabled the administration to do what it really wanted to do, which was stop people from using sound money as money and instead using the paper fiat so they could inflate and print and run more government programs. And so Warren is basically saying the same thing here. Don't just be quiet about your opposition. Have some manly fortitude and shield against it. So again, during this time, he became close friends with John Hancock, Samuel Adams, and in less than 2 years, in response to the Townshend Acts, in February of 1768, here from Tom Malone, writing under a new pseudonym, A True Patriot, Warren, the reason he took that name is because somebody on the bad guy's side was writing as a true patriot from whatever location. And he's like, no, this is what a true patriot looks like. Warren took aim in the Boston Gazette at Massachusetts Governor Francis Bernard, charging that he had slandered the Sons of Liberty as rabble to the British Parliament. Merely calling the Sons of Liberty rabble bad people was enough for Warren to step up. Warren's letter in the Gazette ended with a not-so-subtle comparison of the governor to a devil. Now, I don't know some of the references made here in February of 1768, but I will have a link to this so you can read the original source document. But here's how Samuel Forman, I think Samuel was the author of that book, Joseph Warren, The Boston Tea Party, Bunker Hill, and the Birth of American Liberty. This is Samuel Forman over at drjosephwarren.com. Sorry, I'm getting my references wrong here today. But here's how he put it. The stinging words pack multiple punches. They imply that Bernard is a hellion unfit for office and seems to reject both the monarchy and the divine right of kings. Now, these are basically attacking at the foundation of British power over the colonies. And what a surprise. The governor pushed for a libel lawsuit against the paper, the publishers of the paper, for merely printing this. Attacks on free speech have happened all through history. We know, as Benjamin Franklin wrote, copying one of Cato's great essays in the early 1700s. He's like, whoever wants to destroy the liberty of a nation must first begin by subduing the freedom of speech. They understood that tyrants would always try to restrict the free flow of information. Of course, we see that same type of thing still happening today. It happened during the Sedition Act. It happened here in response to merely calling this guy out, saying he's a hellion. The monarchy and the divine right of kings. This type of stuff really shouldn't be happening. And so he tried to get a libel lawsuit against the paper, but his request was ultimately denied by the Massachusetts House of Representatives. And so, of course, Dr. Joseph Warren takes to the paper at the Boston Gazette. Once again, he's totally unrepentant about it. And so just weeks later, he writes, "With pleasure, I hear the general voice of this people in favor of freedom. And it gives me solid satisfaction to find all orders of unplaced independent men firmly determined, as far as in them lies, to support their own rights and the liberty of the press." So important for him to make this case as well. He said, while this people know their true interest, They will be able to distinguish their friends from their enemies as long as they understand that liberty is the foundation, that natural rights are our foundation, that is our true interest. And he said, with uniform courage, they will defend them from tyrannic violence. All those who generously offer themselves volunteers in the cause of truth and humanity. But he said, if ever a mistaken complacence leads them to sacrifice their privileges or the well-meaning asserters of them, they will deserve bondage and soon will find themselves in chains. It's also very similar to that great Benjamin Franklin quote, those who give up a little essential liberty for a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. And Joseph Warren is having a very similar take here, but for different reasons, and really being hardcore about it. Like, look, if you ever just decide to just be complacent and allow them to get away with stuff, you're going to deserve the bondage and will find yourselves in chains. Here from Harvard, recalling Joseph Warren. They point out that in February of 1770, and this is really interesting because Warren was a top-notch physician, or at least for the time, he was renowned as being a doctor. When a young boy named Christopher Sider, I've always gotten this one wrong, I'm sure, the name, was killed by a British official during a protest against the British Customs House, Warren was the doctor who performed the autopsy, confirming that his death was the first of the American Revolution. Now, outrage, if you're not familiar with this situation, you can read about it a little bit more on your own time, but outrage in the wake of that killing led to what we call today the Boston Massacre just a few days later. Warren then served on the Boston committee that reported on the deaths at the Boston Massacre. And he went on to give a little bit later on, he went on to give two main speeches. Every year they held kind of a solemn commemoration of the Boston Massacre. They called it the Massacre Day event or Massacre Day commemoration. And they'd have keynote speakers, and Dr. Joseph Warren was chosen to give two of them. First, in 1772, where he urged the people to never forget the bloodshed of March 5th, 1770. But he also again focused on a natural rights foundation and warned future generations of the great danger of standing armies. They lived through the danger of standing armies, the ready engines of tyranny and oppression. That's how Joseph Warren, I covered that in an episode a few years ago. I do an annual episode covering one of these annual Massacre Day orations. This one was from back in March of 2022, Remembering Boston Massacre Day, Joseph Warren edition. Now, he also put it like this, and this is from his speech. I am very much at loss to know by what figure of rhetoric the inhabitants of this province can be called free subjects when they are obliged to obey implicitly such laws as are made for them by men 3,000 miles off, whom they know not, and whom they have never empowered to act for them. Man, like, why should we have to obey these people so far away? I mean, I know some of my ANCAP friends would love that type of mentality. Now, of course, Joseph Warren was okay with kind of a local collective organization representation, but this is pretty hardcore for the time. The idea that, well, we haven't chosen you. No one has said that we want you to make rules for us. No one has made you a representative, and yet we have to somehow obey you? This is absurd. He said, how can they be said to have property? How can anyone have property when a body of men over whom they have not the least control and who are not in any way accountable to them shall oblige them to deliver up any part or the whole of their substance without even asking their consent? He's gone a little soft here, but this is, again, if you consider in comparison to the time, he's saying, like, look, you can't, it doesn't matter the amount, because some people would say in response to the Stamp Act, and Dickinson responded like this in response to the Townsend Act and the Tea Act as well, like, just because it's small doesn't mean it's an okay thing. It's still bad because it establishes a precedent. And Warren is basically saying the precedent should be zero. They don't have any authority whatsoever, and we don't have really any control over our property if these people, without our consent, can take it away just because they say so. Here he is in a letter to Samuel Adams, a couple years later, in June of 1774, one of my favorite quotes, and I think this really sums up a lot of his views. He said, "Vigilance, activity, and patience are necessary at this time, but the mistress we court is liberty, and it is better to die than not to obtain her." This is, again, give me liberty or give me death. This is the mentality, live free or die, from Dr. Joseph Warren, similar to what we hear from people in New Hampshire, from Patrick Henry and others. But he's saying the mistress we court is liberty. It is better to die than not to obtain her. And again, he lived this mentality, and we'll see a little bit more of that in just a moment. But I do want to point out that all of these original source documents, articles, that book that I mentioned, plus a few other episodes, all this will be linked to in the show notes over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. I'm very grateful for all the very consistent and good work that Alan Mosley does to get this posted and scheduled every single week or every single episode. And I'll get that published a couple of hours after the live stream is done over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. And while I'm here, I want to say a quick hello to everyone out in the live chat. I appreciate you being here, whether this is your first episode or you've been here for every single one since day one. Over on Rumble, there's Gypsy and Brewster and Dennis and a few others. I appreciate you guys being here. There's Missouri Freedom Initiative over on X, Haji and Howard and Senator DT, Kirk, Melody and Silvermine, and a number of Alan Mosley. There's Alan and that Liberty gal. I appreciate you guys all being here. And whatever platform you happen to prefer to watch or listen on, if we're not on all of them, we try to be on as many as possible. Of course, we live stream over at YouTube and X and LinkedIn and Facebook and all the mainstream ones, Twitch, etc. We also live stream at Odyssey and Rumble, but we archive the video other places as well, Brighteon and Minds and BitChute and a few other places. And we're all over all the main podcast platforms. But if we're missing from one, please do let us know, whether it's a comment here or in the archive, or send an email to team@10thamendmentcenter.com. Basically, we want to be where you want us to be in as many places as possible. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty is where you're going to find the blog post for this episode. But I want to get back to Dr. Joseph Warren. And one of the most important things that he worked on, in my mind, is a very important strategic approach on how to deal with stuff when the empire does stuff it's not supposed to do, which is, well, 24/7, 365. And in 1774, in response to what we now call the Intolerable Acts, they were known as the Coercive Acts at the time, he was very influential in drafting and pushing and passing the Suffolk Resolves, which called for non-compliance, resistance to British acts. Here's how Mike Meharry put it. After Parliament passed the Coercive Acts, committees of correspondence from Suffolk, Middlesex, Essex, and Worcester counties in Massachusetts met in Boston to formulate a response. The convention called on all the counties to shut down their courts rather than submit to the British measures. Like, the resolves went much further than just a mere condemnation. A lot of times when we think of resolutions against an act of the empire or the federal government or any level of government, it's generally saying, we don't like this. But it went beyond just a mere condemnation of British actions and called for an aggressive response by the people of Suffolk County, including a boycott of British imports, the curtailment of exports to Great Britain, a refusal to use British products, and a refusal to pay taxes until the Massachusetts Government Act was repealed. You're going to suspend our legislature. You're going to take over the legislative duties or the role that we, the people here, have determined was for us here in Massachusetts. You're going to suspend it and take over your parliament thousands of miles away is going to legislate for everything over us here. Well, we're just going to stop paying taxes then. Now, we don't have too many people with that mentality today. And of course, under a twisted version of modern supremacy, the federal government really is supreme in every case it decides it wants to be. Anyways, the resolves also called for the people of Suffolk County to support a colonial government in Massachusetts free from British authority and urge the colonies to raise a militia. This is very much the mentality that became the foundation for the 10th Amendment. Just like Patrick Henry and his resolves against the Stamp Act, the mentality is you can do certain things, but all the important stuff that affects the lives and liberties of the people in this colony or in these states today, these are only handled by the people or the representatives of their own states, not you guys. And if you go beyond that, well, maybe we'll have to do things like refuse to pay taxes or disobey some of the acts. So there was a very high level of resistance that went throughout these resolves. And here from the text, if a boundless extent of continent, swarming with millions, will tamely submit to live, move, and have their being at the arbitrary will of a licentious minister, they basely yield to voluntary slavery, and future generations shall load their memories with incessant execrations. So Joseph Warren's flair for basically saying if they do stuff that they're not authorized to do and you comply, generations in the future are going to hate you for this. They're going to look really, really poorly upon you because you didn't do your duty to humanity, which is stand up for liberty no matter what the government people happen to be doing. And don't be afraid. And we'll see him put that into practice as well. And it's not just Bunker Hill. On the other hand, if we arrest the hand which would ransack our pockets, and I like how he puts that, in response to a tax, he's saying they're ransacking our pockets in response to shutting down their legislature, taking over legislative duties, closing the port. This is not just government protecting people or overreach. It is literally a ripoff. This is a precursor to how maybe Lysander Spooner put it a century later. On the other hand, he writes, if we arrest the hand which would ransack our pockets, if we disarm the parricide which points the dagger to our bosoms, if we nobly defeat that fatal edict which proclaims a power to frame laws for us in all cases whatsoever, here's Joseph Warren, a tip of the hat, recognizing that the root cause of all the problems was, of course, the British Declaratory Act of 1766, which claimed power over them in all cases whatsoever. Unlimited power was a tyranny. It still is. If we successfully resist that unparalleled usurpation of unconstitutional power, well, the people in the future will remember us as heroes, is in essence what he's saying. Now, the resolutions declared, these Suffolk resolves, declared that the British government was acting contrary to the Constitution. Of course, this is the unwritten British Constitution, but he's still saying there's a line in the sand of stuff you're authorized to do. And when you go beyond this, it is our duty to resist what you're trying to do, not just merely ask you to stop. So the colonists were under no obligation to obey. And that's put very much in the text here. He said, no obedience is due from this province to either or any part of the acts above mentioned, the coercive acts, but that they be rejected as the attempts of a wicked administration to enslave America. This is the mentality that's it might be the most important mentality that's missing today that comes from the founders and the old revolutionaries. Now, they didn't all have this mentality right at the outset, but Dr. Joseph Warren was a leading voice in approaching things like this. James Otis Jr. as well, Patrick Henry, and a few others. But certainly the mentality that's missing is that no obedience is due when government does stuff it's not authorized to do, because as long as the people submit to arbitrary measures, as Otis put it, so long will they find masters. And we see that type of mentality flowing here in Joseph Warren's Suffolk Resolves. Again, this is very much a precursor to the 10th Amendment and nullification strategies we follow today. I covered this situation with the Suffolk Resolves and the aftermath in an episode, Blueprint for Liberty, the Suffolk Resolves of 1774. We know that Paul Revere, the day after they were passed, in one of his less famous rides, he took them to Philadelphia, where the Continental Congress unanimously endorsed them. So the Continental Congress in 1774 unanimously endorsed the idea of tax resistance and non-compliance with the coercive acts as the way to deal with an empire out of control. And then they followed up by passing the Declaration Resolves of the First Continental Congress, which reiterated a list of stuff. It was like a list of grievances. It started out with the Declaratory Act saying that, well, they've done this, passed this thing that says they have power over us in all cases whatsoever. And then we have all these other acts, and to these grievous measures we cannot submit. So you can see how what Joseph Warren and then what was taken to the Continental Congress by Paul Revere, how this influenced the entire Continental Congress as well. There was some debate at first, and then they passed the Continental Association, the first of the founding four. Again, I covered that in an episode, which will be linked to in the show notes. Now we're going to get more more to Paul Revere's more famous ride in a few. But Joseph Warren's second Massacre Day oration was March 6th, 1775. He passed away. He was killed soon after. Now, this time at this speech, the occupying army was present. During the first Massacre Day oration, there wasn't really a British troop presence. But this time, there were thousands of people at the event. There were tons of redcoats, and as many as I believe from what I've read, 300 British officers were present. One of them even right in the front row, the way that the story, maybe it's a myth, the way it goes, they supposedly held up bullets to Joseph Warren basically as a threat, like, hey, you mouth off, we're going to blow your head off. Now, we know that the regulars were certainly going to resent an oration whose purpose was, and this is how Samuel Adams described it, quote, to commemorate a massacre perpetuated by soldiers and to show the danger of standing armies. So the entire purpose, according to Samuel Adams, who of course was in many ways a mentor to Joseph Warren, a partner and a great friend, but he understood what Warren was going there to do. He's telling people that standing armies are the bane of liberty. But Warren, even in the face of this, even with the dude who was holding up the bullets. Supposedly he took a cloth and just dropped it over it, just blew it off, very theatrical about it. But basically, don't be intimidated. He said, quote, act worthy of yourselves. Have some standards. I mean, if we're humans and we have natural human rights, to cower in fear in the face of a frightening enemy seems kind of normal, but it is not worthy of a people who loves liberty. In the face of a standing army occupier, here from the overview of the episode I did in this, and direct threats to his own life, the great Revolutionary War hero Dr. Joseph Warren urged the people to stand firm for liberty in the face of the mighty British Empire, quote, in Warren's words, until tyranny is trodden underfoot. I covered that just a couple of months ago. Freedom is the prize. Dr. Joseph Warren's Boston Massacre Day oration, V2. That'll be linked to in the show notes. I do encourage you to check that out as well. Again, don't be intimidated and act worthy of yourselves. He did focus quite a bit on natural rights and individual liberty in that speech. And here's a little excerpt. That personal freedom is the natural right of every man. Again, this is not about collective rights. A lot of people want us to think that everything's about collectivism, but it is not. Personal freedom is the natural right of every man, and that property or an exclusive right to dispose of what he has honestly acquired by his own labor necessarily arrives therefrom, are truths which common sense has placed beyond the reach of contradiction. So to the Sons of Liberty, to Joseph Warren specifically, it's about individual liberty. We have that individual liberty, our personal freedom, not as a gift from government, not because there's words on paper saying that we have the ability to do this or that. We have that whether government agrees with us or not. And the foundation of our personal freedom is the right to property because it secures so many other things. It's an exclusive right to dispose of the fruits of our own labor as we determine. So anything taking from that, I guess, would be taxation is theft. And he goes a little further. He said, it is further certain from a consideration of the nature of mankind, as well as from constant experience, that standing armies always endanger the liberty of the subject. This guy, a war hero, is the one who's telling us that no matter what, in every situation, standing armies always endanger liberty. Now, just weeks later, after this, he was the guy who actually sent Paul Revere and two others out on that famous midnight ride to warn that the British were coming, Lexington and Concord. So that's really important. He was the man who was really kind of organizing things. And here from George Wildrick, he points out that Warren participated in the harassment. Not only is he the guy writing resist, take a stand, not only is he the guy who's working with the intelligence and getting the word out via Paul Revere, not only is he saying tax resistance, have some manly resistance, he's actually participating on the front line. And he is pretty hardcore about it, too, much more than I could ever imagine being. Warren participated in the harassment of British troops retreating from Lexington and Concord on April 19th. You may be aware that there was some shooting, but as the British started retreating, there was a small group of militia that kept going after them, harassing them. And Here, I'll go a little further. He did this both as a soldier and a doctor. So he's raiding them from behind and then also stopping to treat people when he needed to minister wounded rebels. He was subsequently selected to be the president of the provincial Congress and thus the rebellion's executive leader of the colony. Now, he was almost killed while he was raiding. In fact, some people were basically, from my understanding, they were urging him to kind of ease off. But he supposedly said, "I will either see my country free or shed my last drop of blood to make her so." Now, a week later, he sends a letter, an account of the events at Lexington and Concord to Benjamin Franklin in London. Now, he had sent him a letter a couple of weeks before that, early in April, basically introducing himself. I wonder if he knew something was going down. But he sent an account to Benjamin Franklin in London, and he urged Franklin to tell the British that Americans would, quote, sell their liberty only at the price of their own lives. Again, that'll be linked to in the show notes over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. And as mentioned before, a week after this, Warren was elected the president of the Massachusetts Provisional Government. He was also, this is from Jason Mandrish, founder of The Day, great little website. I shouldn't call it little website. That sounds demeaning. It's a great big website with really short blog posts on interesting tidbits of history and on founders. He points out that Warren was also commissioned as a major general based on his intelligence and reputation. But during the lead up to the Battle of Bunker Hill, which is technically misnamed, Dr. Warren gave some surprising information to his generals. He wished to serve as a private on the front line. And Jason says they were shocked and tried to talk him out of this. But because Warren was too important to the cause. But Warren's mentality about being too important to the cause, he agreed, but it was a different view. He doesn't want to be standing in the back telling people what to do. He wants to lead people and show them what kind of courage they need to have if there is to be a victory against such a mighty, mighty force. Warren felt the same. Now, Lawrence Reed has a really interesting point on this. He's got a great article called "The Founding Father Who Fought for Liberty at Bunker Hill and Paid with His Life" over at fee.org. Now, Warren, in the run-up to this, a biographer, Alexander Everett, recounted a conversation with Elbridge Gerry. It was the night before the Battle of Bunker Hill in June of 1775. Supposedly, Gerry urged extreme caution, Lawrence writes, to which Warren replied, quote, "I am aware of the danger, but I should die with shame if I were to remain at home in safety while my friends and fellow citizens are shedding their blood and hazarding their lives in the cause." Again, it's liberty or death. That's the mentality that he always has. We know that he was probably memorialized all for history in the very famous painting called "The Death of General Warren at the Battle of Bunker Hill." He fought till he ran out of ammo. He was struck down and killed instantly once someone recognized him and he had nothing to shoot with. And this was just 6 days after his 34th birthday. And again, this was immortalized in that painting by Jonathan Trumbull, which is up here on the screen if you're watching, or it'll be linked to in the show notes if you're listening to the audio edition and want to be able to pull that up. "The Death of General Warren at the Battle of Bunker's Hill." Now, they called him General Warren, even though he still fought as a private. Maybe they considered his commission to be valid. I don't know, but he was still a general at the time, and that's how John Trumbull painted it as well. Here from the New England Historical Society, this is really interesting. I thought I'd include this as well. "Had Warren lived," they write, said loyalist Peter Oliver in 1782, "George Washington would have been an obscurity." Now, I think that's an overstatement. It's probably a bit of regional chauvinism from Peter Oliver. But that and this quote from Thomas Gage, General Gage said the death of Joseph Warren was, quote, "worth the death of 500 men." So this showed how the empire viewed and feared people like Joseph Warren because of their great courage, their willingness to take a stand, to put their lives on the line for what they believed in. And this great quote from the end of his first Massacre Day oration, I think, sums up the way he lived the revolution from day one, pro-liberty and anti-empire. He said, "May our land be a land of liberty, the seat of virtue, the asylum of the oppressed, a name and a praise to the whole earth, until the last shock of time shall bury the empires of the world in one common, undistinguished ruin. I don't know if I got that as good as it should have been, but to me, that is one of the most important statements that he made. Take a stand for liberty, bring down empire, and that's going to be good for humanity. His birthday tomorrow, we're going to do a lot of posting over on our socials. So make sure you follow us on all of our platforms, the ones at least that you're using, because we'll do a lot more updates, some quotes and articles and things on Joseph Warren. But I hope you found this interesting, hope it was educational. And if you want to help us reach and teach other people with this essential historical information, these foundational principles, nothing helps us do this work more than the financial faith and support of our members. You can join us for as little as $2 a month over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. I really appreciate any consideration you can give to joining us today. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Thank you again for being here. I hope you enjoyed the episode. I hope you learned something, and I hope to see you next time here on the Path to Liberty.